Shabbat Shalom. We're going to have a new study in the Bible about the 15th chapter of the book of Exodus. And this is a very interesting chapter. Even in the written Torah scrolls, you can see how this Song of Moses, the song at the sea, the Song of the Sea, where they came through in their en route to the Promised Land, how the words of this song are positioned in the Torah scroll. It's like bricks, with one brick and a little space, and then another brick, one word, space, another word, and then on top of those is the word above it is written like the half of this word covering the half of this word, as if it's bricks that are cemented on each other, as if these words are positioned in such a way that they make you think about the stones, the bricks that were baked in the sun of the Egyptian climate, hot climate, where Hebrew slaves were forced into labor. The underlying question today of this study is: how are we able to make sure that our old character continues to be old instead of coming up fresh? And we'll see in several texts how this is worked out. Let's start reading from Exodus 15, the verses 1 through 4. It's coming on the screen as well. And you'll see that in the text it says somewhere wrong translation, and I do that on purpose. I did it on purpose, and I will explain why I did that. Here we go. Then Moses and the people of Israel sang, wrong translation, this song to the Lord, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a military combat soldier. His name is Adonai. Pharaoh's chariots and his host he cast into the sea, and his picked officers, his specially selected officers, are sunk in the Red Sea. The Hebrew text says something that is not translated in most translations I've seen, in Dutch and in English, because if it was he sank, if it would be then they sang this song, there would be in the Hebrew something like Az Shar Moshe, but it doesn't say that. And because it doesn't say it, there's the need of a different translation. I will get to that in a little while. I'll first build it up so that you see how this fits in. It's not just that they were singing there, and the real text, the original text, has a different word which is often not translated correctly. Egypt was the homeland temporarily for Israel, but Israel was able to finally leave that country. Finally. Imagine that you live in a village somewhere in the country where you live, or if you live peacefully, imagine another situation somewhere in a village, together with the people you know and you like, with your congregation, in some way, in some form or shape of another. And there is this social life of the congregation. There's this neighbors peacefully work, activities in the neighborhood, schools for the children, sharing and asking and giving. All of a sudden, you are surrounded by terrorists, and there are days of shootings. And I'm just making this up, but there are situations like this, but I'm just making hypothetical situation here. And then finally there comes help from outside, and there are bombs, and there is a lot of noise and a lot of chaos around you. Finally the terrorists give up, and you can move freely again. I think I would sing such a song as we read in chapter 15 of Exodus, as well as Moses did this with his people. You thank the soldiers who freed you. You thank the Lord as the hero of the war. You see this in Exodus 15 verse 3, where he is mentioned by Moses as the Lord is a military combat soldier. This was not a normal war, like there are so many of them. This is where the God of Israel has his existence and his promises linked to the people of Israel, linked to Moses as the leader at that moment, when he gave these promises and his laws and his insights, which is exactly at the same time reason for people with a different vision and a different God and a different religion to fight against it. It might be that this war is different than other wars and deeper and has more consequences and more important than just any other victory in a war, which is wonderful to have these victories. On the other hand, it is horrible anyway to be in a war, of course. So finally Israel is allowed to leave, and the fastest route to the promised land would be along the coastal road up to the north. But that would make it very easy to return anytime there would be a setback and a disappointment, because setbacks and disappointments are not only a way of fleeing and therefore trying to evade and the challenge and the opportunity to grow. Setbacks and disappointments are traps that can expose the old character of the person. You are betraying yourself in as much you have your reaction when something goes in a different way than you expected or hoped it to be. This is why Israel is protected against itself and is prevented from going directly to the promised land along the coastal road. So the route goes eastwards and not with a curve to the north anyway. No, it continued to go eastward into the sea, to the Reed Sea, the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba. The sea which is red because of algae in the sea, the Red Sea. Before they took this route, Moses took care that everybody had weapons. And you see this in Exodus 13, verse 18. On the screen as well. God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Now that's not just a pep talk, this equipping for battle, that is being armed. And so that an attack would not be a surprise for Israel. The same thing happened around the foundation of the state of Israel in 1948. Weapons and weapon industry, weapons of mass destruction, buying weapons, that all belongs to this world which has destruction in its DNA. And don't say that they didn't have faith by having weapons. No, you should not fight. You should expect everything from God. You don't find that in the Bible. It's not a biblical thing to say that. They trusted God. Being weaponized, being in possession of weapons goes hand in hand in this context with God's protection. Same thing goes with a health insurance. There are people who say, no, I don't want that because that shows that I'm depending on flesh and blood and not on God. But God doesn't ask you to do work like that. He wants us to take all the responsibilities we can get. And the more you grow in your spiritual growth, the more responsibilities you are going to carry. In our spiritual growth, the Lord teaches us that you bear a big responsibility. During the day, the Lord used a pillar of cloud that was pointing the way like a global positioning system. At night, there was a pillar of fire that showed the route with heavenly light. On top of that, there was also the angel of the Lord, who was leading the army that went in front. At a certain point, this angel is mentioned changing his position. Exodus 14 verse 19, just for in words of illustration. Then the angel of God, who went before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So there is this angel as the commander of the army, of an army of Israel and an army of angels, because there's a heavenly combat going on as well. There are those pillars as direction providers, the cloud and the fire, and the Lord is accompanying Israel and leading the way. What is it that Moses has been singing? And you find this in Exodus chapter 15 verse 1 through 7. Now we went through the first 4 verses. So let's go to verse 5 through 7. There we go. The floods cover them, those soldiers of Pharaoh. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Lord, glorious power. Your right hand, Lord, shatters the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrow your adversaries. You send forth your fury, and it consumes them like stubble. When you read this song, this beautiful song, that has this translation challenge that we'll come to in a moment. When you read this, there are 5 issues that ask for our attention, because they're not only for this song, but they are for also in our time in which we live now. And that is that Moses, first of all, Moses is praising God. It's on the screen. And I'll go into that a little just after mentioning these points. The second point is regarding the miracles done by the Lord. The third point is the plan of the enemy and the failure of those plans. The fourth one is the response of the surrounding world, which is bewilderment. And the fifth one is the future of Israel. Now that last one is so interesting and has to do with this wrong translation. It's an excellent list of points, 5 points which we can use to fight against our old nature, our old character, and keep it confined. Very important. This song has to do with that. It's not just a war that is mentioned and then we go on with the nice things of life. This is part of reality. We need to see this as the challenge that we have in our lives, as part of the whole list of challenges, which are nasty things to go through, but which are at the same time opportunities to grow spiritually. We'll see that. I'll come to that again a couple of times in this study. 5 points. The first one, going into them. Moses praising God. He's praising God because it says in the Dutch translation, I'm hesitating to see if this is true. It says that the Lord is fighting the arrogant person. I'm looking at this, if I can find it quickly, because perhaps it's still coming. But this is what's happening. I will get to that. I promise. So there is this this arrogance that was the way of recognizing the enemy in its ways. And we come to the question: what does that mean that we're arrogant? And I'm still trying to look it up. I'm reading, and if I can find this, we'll get to that, I guess, because I cannot find it here. In 15:1, I will sing for the Lord, because he's high above the arrogant person. It says in the Hebrew, immediately in the beginning already. Now, everyone, I guess, will remember a situation in which someone else is treating you nastily, not very badly, not reasonable. We cannot talk to that person because it throws everything off the table. There is a strange situation in the war of Israel against its enemies, Hamas, that an organization, a terrorist organization like Hamas, is attacking Israel, and is then very disappointed and very disturbed when Israel hits back. That is a way of being arrogant, hitting someone and being very angry because the person is defending himself and is hitting back. But in the Bible, the word arrogance is a word for somebody who doesn't want to think of what the Lord would see in our actions and words if they are wrong. If you don't think about that, if your conscience doesn't say anything to wake you up, then you are in trouble. Not nice for the person to undergo, to being in touch with that, but the arrogant person is the one who will lose in the end. And this is why Moses is singing that the Lord is above the arrogant, above the person who is haughty and is just so self-centered that he doesn't think about the other person, doesn't care about what God would think. That's why Moses is singing about this, that really realizing that God is your enemy when you're arrogant. That realization will help you and me against our old nature, against our old character, fighting against your arrogant nature. Then, regarding the miracles done by the Lord, Moses is singing about it. It's very important to see, if you see miracles, and these were big miracles, but if you see small miracles where you can really think this is a miracle, and check with other people, is this a miracle? I've heard people say the stoplight was green when I was driving my car, and I thought, that's a miracle. Ask people if they agree with you, and be honest and say to the person, if that person says no, that you will accept any answer, whether yes or no, because it's no. But there are miracles, small miracles in our lives, and God's wrath is the salvation and the liberation for Moshe and his people. This is why he's singing about the horse and the one upon the horse, that he throws them into the sea, and that the Lord, his might and his power and his anger has been the solution, salvation for Moses and for Israel. And that this is my God. This is how God operates. This is wonderful. This is why I praise him, the God of my father. Him I praise. Now, it is not so that Moses is laughing about drowning, the drowning of the Egyptian army, but it is a business point of looking at this, being thankful that obviously and objectively looking at it, this was the means through which God was helping, assisting Israel. Plus, Moses is realizing that the Lord has done it himself. It's not the work of human hands. Adonai ish milchama. The Lord is a master warrior. He is a combat soldier. If you believe those words, that God is a combat soldier, that he is a war hero, coming from the words that Moses is singing in this chapter of Exodus, if you believe that in your soul and you have that trust regarding this, then you should show this in your relaxed response to any kind of situation that comes your way, instead of loud protest and being busy and trying to defend and acting and stuff like that. If you really have this faith, it makes you a wise and quiet person. The third point, the plan of the enemy and the failure of the plan of the enemy. The wicked plan of the enemy worked until it didn't work anymore. This is how long it goes. But as long as it works, that plan, it sows anxiety and doubt. And as soon as it fails, you give the Lord all honor. But it needs to be that when it works, the plan of the enemy, that you're already into this mode of trust, faith, that God will bring it to a good end. You don't know when. You might even die before you find it out, like many people in the Bible, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, haven't seen the promises of God, but in the end, God it gives victory. Your old nature is sensitive to fear and doubt, so be careful. They might eat that up and grow. Your old nature, by personal experience, realize that God gives you victory, is what I'm saying. Then the fourth one, the response of the surrounding world. Now, interesting, the surrounding world was clapping and shouting for joy when Israel was attacked. As soon as the roles were reversed, it was the world that was bewildered and got anxiety. You see this in the verses in chapter 15, 14 and 15. The peoples have heard about what you did, God. Moses is singing. They tremble. Pangs have seized on the inhabitants of Philistia. Now are the chiefs of Edom dismayed. The leaders of Moab, trembling seizes them. All of the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. So many enemies surrounding Israel. And the principle here is this. People will see when God is fighting for you and is your wrath. People will see. You don't have to expose it too much. You don't have to pronounce it and to proclaim it too much. And the less you do, the more God will be visible. The less attention to you focus to yourself, the less attention to God, even for yourself. It is more and more invisible what God is doing. So it's very important for your old nature to be more quiet and let God do certain things, not forgetting your own responsibilities in it all. Fifth and very important point is the future of Israel. And you will find this, for instance, in Exodus 15, verse 17 and 18 on the screen. You will bring them in, my people, Moses says, and you will plant them on your own mountain, the place, Lord, which you have made for your abode, the sanctuary, Lord. And he's talking about the temple in Israel, but not only. Which your hands have established. And this is the interesting thing where it says which your hands have established, because the temple in Jerusalem was built by human hands. So this is more than the temple in Jerusalem. The Lord will reign forever and ever. So this point of the future, you will see them again in the text in the letter to the Hebrews, the Messianic Jews. Your old nature will start to tremble when you realize what the future entails for those who love God and who don't have this arrogance in their character anymore. It's not gone, it's not totally disappeared, but you're able to tame it and confine it. And Moses already is talking about this eternal foundation, the makom he talks about. From a verb lakum, that means to establish, and having a firm, eternal place, which is not on earth. We realize that. He's talking about the temple, I guess, in a sense, which is built later than these words. He's also talking about the model that he received on the mountain, the Mount Sinai, the mountain where God showed him the eternal model of the temple in the heavens, in the heavenly places. Moses and his people realized these things by God's direct infusion of information. Very interesting. This can only be done by God when people have His Holy Spirit. Otherwise you don't get this information, you don't understand, you don't appreciate this information. And realizing these things, realizing the future of Israel, will break down slowly but surely our old nature. So the song is talking about the Lord, His actions. Thirdly, the plan of the enemy that starts to have success but then fails. The response of the world. And fifthly, the future of Israel. It's a nice and important list to tame our old nature. And talking about God on earth and in heaven and His will being done, you find again in the Kaddish, the Hebrew famous prayer, see the parallels, see the similarities. Therefore, also in the Our Father who is in heaven prayer in the New Testament, which is directly related to the Kaddish and is a parallel prayer to this other older or perhaps even contemporary prayer. Back to what I promised you to talk about. Back to chapter 15, verse 1. What then is the text in Exodus 15:1? Let's read it again. On the screen, you will see, if first the not, then the but comes later. And what it does not say is then Moses sang and Israel and so forth and so on. That's not what it says, because there is a future tense in the verb, and that means that we're talking about future, not about then only. Yes, they sang, I believe that, but it's not only limited to that moment. So what does it say in the Hebrew? In the Hebrew, it says as Yashir Moshe. That's a future tense, and that should be translated, if you like literal translation. In the screen, on the screen, you'll see it as well. So Moses will sing. That's the future. Moses will sing, and the children of Israel. In the next sentence in chapter 15, you see that the future tense is used. So and also correctly translated, but the first words, the same future is mentioned and used. It's a future meaning of the verb. The translators didn't know what to do with that, and they translated it so he sang. But the literal text means more than that. And that is this. Have you ever asked yourself why the mystical final book of the Bible, the book Revelation, in accidentally chapter 15, at the time of the Bible writing and the origin of the texts, there were no chapters and verses, but it so happens that in Exodus 15 the song is written, and in the book of Revelation chapter 15 the same song of Moses is mentioned again. Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea. Have you ever asked yourself why this mystical final book of the Bible mentions this same book in Exodus 15? Have you heard people that say, "Yo, you don't have to use this Old Testament anymore"? Well, it's very actual when you see it mentioned in the book of Revelation. The answer is that it's because of this choice of words of this chapter in Exodus that causes the author in the New Testament, John, the beloved disciple of Yeshua, to talk about this, also inspired by God himself to do this. And so he says, And so Exodus 15, the first verse, is saying, so then, or like this, will Moses sing and the children of Israel. Now you might ask, okay, so now we have the literal text, now what does that mean? We have the text, we honor the literal text. What does that mean? It means this. They, Moses and his people, they see the miracle of the sea, which opens itself in order to allow Moses and his people to go through it. And it closes when the Egyptian troops are in the sea in order to pursue the people of Israel. And under the total impression, being impressed by this miracle, the text of this song comes in them by the Spirit of the Lord. And then what happens in chapter 15, verse 1? The author of this chapter, Exodus 15, verse 1, makes known to the readers, then and now, that they will also sing this same song in the future. And this is the answer to the question, why is it mentioned in the book of Revelation? Because it will be sung in the future. Adonai will bring the dead to life again in the Messianic era. And then they all, you and your ancestors, will sing God's praises as Exodus 15:1, confirmed by the book of Revelation chapter 15, are telling us. And then we will have that same, I hope, spiritual level that Moses and his people had to sing this song unison, and at the same time imagine that there is a new song that everybody sings, not having trained or practiced this song first, spontaneously. It's a spiritual act, it's a act of God. And it will be then that at that moment that all of Israel sing this song again. All of Israel will be saved, it says in Romans 11. And this shows in the New Testament, that is, that all of Israel will be saved. The New Testament is not an anti-Semitic book. It's very pro-Israel and says all of Israel will be saved. And this all shows that after persecution and oppression and genocide, which Israel went through, a higher spiritual level has been reached. That these things go hand in hand. You can have oppression, you can have persecution and genocide, and you can just or less of these horrible things, and have the response of running away and see if you can find another congregation where it's nicer and more peaceful and stuff like that. What is the spiritual answer to situations you come up with, that you are confronted with? How can you respond to situations in such a way that you are dealing with your old nature, is the question of this whole study. So it's very, very, very important that we, in any situation, in situations where there is resistance, where we suffer in sickness and in health, in passing away, that we on the one hand have the freedom and the emotional expression of feeling miserable and being very sad and experience sorrow, and at the same time have an opportunity to grow spiritually. Look at your own response to the pandemic of coronavirus. I'm not saying anything whether you should do this or that or whatever. Look at your response to the pandemic. Are you going to attack in words or in actions, your government officials? Are you going to believe all the fake news in your computer? Do you realize that there is artificial intelligence and algorithms who are activated by your searches and bring all kinds of news or fake news to your computer? Or are you becoming more quiet and see this and use this Corona time as an opportunity to grow spiritually. But this study is not about Corona, but is about our old nature. So let's go to the second of the main text, the Haftarah it's called, and then the book of Judges, chapter 4, the verses 4 through 7, out of a bigger context. And I read, Deborah, in Hebrew she's called Devorah, Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidot, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah, specially mentioned, named after her, between Ramah and Bethel, in the hill country of Ephraim. And the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. Now this is a picture, an image, people coming up to the judge is an image that you see in more Middle East countries even now, where people come up to the leader of the Arab country and seeking advice and judgment. So this was already the case then. She sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Keresh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, she knew this and told him, what an authority she is exerting there, go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali and the tribe of Zebulun in Hebrew, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand. Prophetess, leader, judge, interesting. This chapter is proving and is a testimony that the Bible wants women to be equal to men. This is how woman-friendly the Bible is. We need to realize this. A female judge, governor, Deborah, bringing victory to Israel by her insights, by God's hand, and by her own big responsibility that she takes upon herself, who summons the executive chief of the army to her. This is an example for all of us. Barak is that general of Israel at the time. In his time, the kingdom Hazor, in Hebrew Chatzor, under the king of King Yabin, had come to new growth and blossoming. Chatzor was oppressing the country of Israel. Before that time, it was the army under the leadership of Joshua who had victory over the country, and now they were fighting against Israel. So Barak was summoned to go with 10,000 men from the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali to occupy the mountain of Tabor. You can drive and see this mountain in the plain of Israel nowadays. From there, he needed to go on a war against Yabin himself, and Barak knew to convince Deborah to go with him. There were already troops there from the tribes of Issachar and Ephraim and Manasseh and Benjamin, and they were armed but very lightly and bad, and they thought of a military plan, which I think the Lord had a hand in. They were on a higher position than the troops, which is good when you're fighting against the enemy. Try to be on a higher situation. And from the height on which they were, they jumped down on the army, the big army, down on the floor, on the ground level. Leader of this army, Sisera, was the leader of Yabin, and he under Yabin, and he had tents being located there in a camp situation in this great valley close to the river Kishon. It's mentioned in this text, and at that moment there is a convincing victory for Israel. And the victory song is written down in Judges chapter 5. But, and see here the spiritual level of these different people. The general of the army, Barak, was not allowed to kill the leader of the enemy. Reason? He didn't have the courage in the beginning to take lead in this war that the Lord told him to wage against the enemy. So the honorable task, which is in a war situation might be different than in peacetime, to kill the enemy's leader, is given to someone else. Who? To another woman. Again a woman, yes, but another woman, Yael. A woman who had her tent in that same environment, and she saw the leader himself, Sisera, the enemy captain, the captain of the enemy, running for his safety. She invited him in her tent and said, come, good man, come into my tent, I can help you. And she had a plan, and helping she did, but not him. She invited him into her tent, and he was lying down. She gave him a blanket to lie under, and he asked for something to drink and said, I have a good plan, I'll give you milk. Milk is good for you, it's warm, and it makes you quiet. It has calcium, by the way, and this helps to become more quiet and to sleep better. And so you can see that some women are able to be very causing men to be sleepy and causing him head pain. The head ache came because of the fact that when he lied down and slept, she used a pin for the tent to be stable. She drove it through the head of this leader while he was sleeping. And so there was the final blow to the enemy, the army of the enemy. And a picture, a vivid picture of what to do in a war situation. Are you running away? And it might be that you are in a much less serious situation in your life. Something happens, a crisis. Are you running away? Or are you able to confront and do the things God is really asking? Do you give him a chance to talk to you? Are you listening? All these things to combat against your old nature. The last text in this study, the text of the Torah and the Haftarah are prescribed in the whole Jewish world. The text of the New Testament, Berit Chadashah in the Hebrew, I choose myself, and this is today it's Hebrews, the letter to the Hebrews, meaning the Messianic Jews, chapter 8, verses 1 through 5. And I read, the conclusion of what we're saying in this beautiful letter that this author, we don't know who it is, says, what we're saying is this: we have such a wonderful high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven. He is servant in the sanctuary. Some Bibles say he's a servant, but hey, the high priest himself, don't call him a servant. In the Greek, the original text, there is no word for the word a, it's just left out. And so you can just say he's servant. And don't make it a servant. In the sanctuary, the true tent which is set up not by man but by the Lord. There is this same thing which we were listening to when Moses was singing these words in chapter 15 of Exodus, verses 17 and 18. Not set up by man, but by the Lord. Every high priest, and this is what this whole study is entailing, it's pointing at the future. And looking at that future is backfiring, I hope, to the time in which we live, helping us to fight against our old nature, because we are, a beautiful future is waiting for us if we do the right things, take the right choices, make the right decisions. Every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Hence, it's necessary for this priest in the heavens, also to have something to offer. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. Which law is that? It's the law which says that only sons of Aaron can be high priests. But Yeshua is from a different order of priests named after Melchizedek. They serve a copy and a shadow of the heavenly sanctuary. Shadow not meant in a derogatory way, but in a respectful way. It's the shadow of the real heavenly sanctuary. How honorful to be in that sanctuary already on earth. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, he was instructed by God, "See that you make everything according to the pattern which was shown to you on the mountain." In this text, you can read what the letter to the Hebrews is all about. Some people are talking about the disappearance of the covenant. Now, the interesting thing in this Hebrews letter is that some sentences talk about disappearance of something, but it doesn't mention what the something is. And some people think, oh, it's the covenant. And those are the people that don't believe in the old covenant, where there are all these Torah commandments for the Jews. They're not for us, the Christians. On the contrary, it has nothing to do with the disappearance of the covenant. It has everything to do with the disappearance of the priesthood. Not the breaking away of the law, because the priesthood continues, as you can see, but it is the priesthood according to the order of Melchizedek. So this priesthood was already in an interesting line of development, because it has been the old situation that each city, each village in the old Israel had its own priest. That changed under Moses in a people with a temple with priests in the center, a centralized religion. Also in the time of King David and Solomon. But finally, it would be different, and you see that in 2,000 years ago the temple was destroyed by the Romans, and it was a fact now already 2,000 years ago. And Moses and his people sang about that time that Israel and soulmates, spiritual soulmates, would enjoy the heavenly temple. That, my friends, is what you read in Exodus chapter 15, verse 1. Moses and his people will sing in that time that we're talking about now. The heavenly sanctuary, with a different kind of priesthood, because the law is not changed. The execution of the law is different. Not the order of Aaron, the brother of Moses, but the order of Melchizedek, that you say in English, a person who lives a peer in the time of Abraham. On earth, indeed, Yeshua was not a priest because he was not of the order of Aaron. That was known by God already when he planned all this before he made it happen. On earth, everything has to go according to the law, but the law doesn't disappear. Certain elements develop, which is the priesthood, which the letter to the Hebrews is talking about. In the heavens, the principles are the same, and the laws are the same, but the execution might differ a little bit. Yeshua is the image of God Himself, and so in such a way that He's for a time. I talked about that last week in our study. He's next to the angels in the position where He's able to die, where He's able to feel pain, suffering, and like people like you and me. Yet at the same time, He's the image of humankind and the image of God Himself, standing there in an incredible position of being God on earth, and yet at the same time also being among His own people. God among His own people, with soulmates surrounding them. What Yeshua can do as high priest, earthly priests could not do. Paying for the guilt that earthly people cause to happen. They did it with animals, very important. It was part of God's plan. So don't say, oh, fortunately we don't have to do that anymore. Don't say that. It was a necessary step in a beautiful worked out plan by God. He was also the first one to raise from the dead, being raised from the dead, so that afterwards earthly people could do the same. He served God with Yeshua in the heavenly sanctuary as the servant. If you keep in mind this picture, your old nature will tremble, because this future is bright and beautiful, and you can be part of it. Realize that the Song of the Sea talks about this future in Exodus chapter 15 and in the book of Revelation chapter 15. Let's read the first 3 verses of the book of Revelation of chapter 15. I saw another portent in the heaven, great and wonderful, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last, for with them the wrath of God is ended. And I saw what appeared to be an ocean of glass mingled with fire. An ocean of glass and fire. Sounds like the night we remember. It's a Jewish night of horror in November 8 and 9, 10 and 11, that surrounding days, what's called the Crystal Night, when in shops in Germany, the windows of Jewish shops were the glass was shattered, and a ocean of glass mingled with fire was taking place. And he saw, this is what John, who writes this revelation, saw. He saw what appeared to be an ocean of glass mingled with fire, and those who had conquered beside that ocean. They had conquered what? They had conquered the beast and its image and the number 666 of its name. The conquerors were standing beside that ocean of glass. It's not just a nice picture of that ocean of glass. It could be the ocean of all the persecution that Israel had to go through. And since Israel is experiencing the Exodus, which we read about in the Bible at the moment, together with a mingled mass of other people of other nations, it's also the persecution and the misery and the death and destruction that other peoples and nations have gone through. It's all there. And those who have not bowed the beast and its image and the number 666, which is a way of saying that this beast is the personification of what has to do with the number 6, which is the day on which the humankind, men and women, human beings, are being created. Nothing wrong with that number 6 and the 6th day. But if you only stick and focus on your creation and that 6th day, and you don't grow into the 7th day of the week, being the Shabbat, and the 8th day, which is the day beyond the calendar of the earth, if you don't grow spiritually, you are on your way to have this arrogance that God is above and is trying to and will be able to destroy. Don't have this arrogance in you. They are standing beside the ocean of glass, having conquered the beast and the image and the number 666 of its name, and they sing. They have harps of God in their hands, and they sing the Song of Moses, back to Exodus 15. The servant of God, the song of the Lamb, saying, "Great and wonderful are your deeds, Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, King of the ages." Wonderful picture. Be part of it. If you read the Bible, this text of this week, the whole text, you will come across a crisis because there was a water shortage. Now, if you travel through the deserts, water is of the essence. And if there's a shortage, you make sure that you're heard with your complaint. The way in which you do that makes all the difference. It shows your growth. It shows your trust in God, trust also in people, because those are again hand in hand. Moses is saying to them, you are not only fighting against me, but also to God. In other words, they're not only complaining against God, but also to the human leadership. Is there a problem if somebody is thirsty in a desert situation that he's saying, I'm thirsty? No, there's no problem with that. That's not the problem. Moses is irritated because the way in which it's brought to him, conveyed to him. Why does he describe the remarks of Israel as wrong against him and the Lord? Realize that it was the Lord himself who leads Israel to that place of no water. Sometimes these things happen in our lives and we need to realize why. There must be a meaning behind it. Let's think about it. Now that's the spiritual way to approach these things. Not too long, because you're thirsty, you need to do something. And when you come to this kind of a situation in your own congregation, you can choose between two ways to go. You can make quarrel, you can scream, you can walk away and be angry. And the other way is that you set up an argument in a reasonable way, in a rational way, and you stay and you say, now let's see how we can solve this. In the first choice, where you quarrel and argue and be angry and walk away, in the first situation, that person who does that and responds like that leaves the decision and the leadership of God outside his vision. That person only builds his or her sayings, expression, behavior on his or her own feelings. The leader, there's no trust in the leader, there's no trust in the Lord. That person only trusts himself, herself, and will err spiritually. Arrogance, old nature. The second choice, where you say, people, I need to say something. There is no water. We need to do something. Let's find a way to solve this challenge. So in that second choice, that person is wondering what the Lord will have as meaning, as purpose in this challenge where he led you up to the situation, in this very uneasy situation. That person doesn't build his or her response on feelings, but on faith, in trust, that there is a moment of learning that is there. The leader is trusted, the Lord is trusted, and the person is growing in self-trust and in self-confidence. No erring, but spiritual growth is the result. And this is what happened with Moses. You need something and you learn to ask God. That's what the response needs to be. You need something and you don't walk away angry and cursing or not cursing, but angry and there's no way to talk with you anymore. But knowing that the Lord wants to teach you something, whatever it is. But the fact is that there was a spiritual vacuum because these anti-God and anti-Moses responses. There was fear, there was a lack of peace, there was an opportunity for doubt, anxiety, that the people weren't cared for enough, and that fear develops into a vacuum. And because of the vacuum, there is a person that is mentioned in Exodus chapter 17. You find it in the portion of today. It's the final text of today of this study. Let's read it. He called the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the fault finding of the children of Israel. This was their unspiritual, not so spiritual response. And because they put the Lord to the proof by saying, is the Lord among us or not? Then Amalek came and he fought with Israel and Rephidim. You can be sure, you can count on it, that when you have this faith vacuum, you attract more trouble. So Moses realized that he lost people from his congregation, and he needed to see how he responded to that, and he does. But it was not bad leadership. It was because of unspiritual behavior of the members of his congregation. The old arrogance, the old nature were playing and acting up. And only where the leader, Moses, had been obeying the voice and the leadership of God himself, so that they came to this place without water. So how do you make sure that your old character continues to be old and not fresh and actually working again? Think of all these things that we went through. Perhaps you read this or see this YouTube again, and think on this final point that I close with. Imagine you close your eyes and imagine that you go through this Reed Sea. You travel with Israel through the sea. It's only an exercise of a minute. You can make it longer if you want, but you can do it in a minute. And you see this as a baptism in the midst of threat. A baptism that makes sure that the enemy stays behind, caught by the water as the enemy, the drowning enemy, the sea of the water of the sea that allows you to go through and cuts off the enemy. The sea as a way of making a geographical and spiritual difference between you and your enemy. This is what happened with Israel. They still had to fight their old nature. They left Egypt, but Egypt had not left Israel yet, but at least they were able to make this distance, safe distance between themselves and the old Egypt. If you are able to do this in the time that is given to you on this planet Earth, then you reach a lot. Then you reach everything which is possible to tame your old nature. In the heavenly temple, there is that old is not there anymore, and all saints, also your ancestors, together with you, are dancing, singing the Song of Moses once again, because Moses sung, but he will sing with you, and that is then, or at that moment, something to look back to and smile and praise God with good reason. I hope this is a help in your and also in my spiritual growth process, because it's important that we do this in order to get to these beautiful places that are described in these texts. And with that, I say to you, Shabbat Shalom.